Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin as we approach the peak of the COVID-19 caseload in New York with the appalling news that New York is about to run out of ventilators just when they are needed most and will soon be needed a lot more. Instead of rising to the challenge, our disgraceful excuse for a leader is dissing our healthcare professionals, one of whom, an emergency room doctor in New Jersey, died from COVID today, of being complainers who are never satisfied, charging without evidence they are selling hospital equipment out the back door. But as true and real as this growing crisis is, and as derelict the leadership from Washington appears, you would never know it if you watched Fox News. But a reckoning of sorts is underway as the nation's death toll reaches 5,000 so far, holding the Trump propaganda machine responsible for spreading lies and disinformation to Fox viewers who, if they follow Trump and the Murdoch network's advice, will start dying in increasing numbers. One of 74 signatories of an open letter to Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch about Fox News' irresponsible coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mark Feldstein, joins us. A professor and the chair of broadcast journalism at the University of Maryland, he is a two-time George Foster Peabody Award-winning investigative correspondent, formerly with CNN, ABC, and NBC, and we'll discuss the irony that the median age of Fox viewers is 65, the very group most vulnerable to the virus. The letter attempts to hold to account a faux populist bilious billionaire tending his vineyard in Bel Air, while Murdoch's hirelings assure Fox viewers the pandemic is a democratic hoax perpetrated by our ruling class and their mouthpieces, whipping up fear over this virus. Then we'll examine the role of Dr. Fauci in the daily White House briefings, who has just had the DOJ and U.S. Marshal Service assign 9 special agents to protect him from death threats coming from the QAnon right-wing lunatic fringe, egged on by Fox's Lou Dobbs, who accuses Dr. Fauci of trying to undermine his dear leader, Donald Trump. Angelo Carusone, the president of Media Matters for America, joins us to discuss how, contrary to speculation that Trump is peeved at being contradicted by Fauci, the much-loved truth teller is the best thing that is happening to Trump because he provides him with cover and is the reason why the mainstream press is forced to broadcast Trump's political rallies dressed up as briefings. Then finally, with 6.65 million Americans applying for unemployment benefits this week, with a total of 10 million having lost their jobs over the past 2 weeks, we will speak with an historian, Robert McIlvaine, whose books include The Great Depression, America 1929 to 1941, Down and Out in the Great Depression, Letters from the Forgotten Man, and The Encyclopedia of the Great Depression. He joins us to discuss projections by the Federal Reserve that unemployment could reach as high as 32.1%, higher than anything witnessed in the Great Depression. And before we go to our first guest, I want to thank you, our listeners and supporters, who have donated to sustain and build Background Briefing as the radio station we broadcast from closes down and we transition to online broadcasting, particularly during this pandemic. Your donations will help us improve our recording capabilities from home, so we encourage you to throw us a lifeline and join the fact-based community of listeners we are building around the globe with your support at backgroundbriefing.org/donate, which helps keep the program independent, corporate-free, and accessible to all those who are not in a position to contribute. And joining us now is Mark Feldstein, who's a professor and the chair of broadcast journalism at the University of Maryland. For over 2 decades, he has been an award-winning investigative correspondent for CNN, ABC, and NBC, and is a 2-time winner of the George Foster Peabody Award, and is the author of Poisoning the Press, Richard Nixon, Jack Anderson, and the Rise of Washington's Scandal Culture. And he is among the 74 signatories of professors and journalists who have issued an open letter to Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch about Fox News' irresponsible coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mark Feldstein.
Oh, great to be here, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Mark. And so far, the letter has gotten a lot of publicity, but have you got a response from the Murdochs?
I haven't heard anything. I was one of the people who drafted it, so but it's only been out a couple days.
Well, basically, the point that you're making here, among many, and we'll go through the letter, is that it is such an irony that Fox News is being so irresponsible and so dangerous by spouting all of this ridiculous propaganda and telling people the whole thing's a hoax for the longest time. The letter points out that the median age of Fox viewers is 65, the very group that's most vulnerable. So that's an irony to begin with, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and it struck me as a particularly powerful irony. That's one of the reasons we emphasized it. Fox has for a long time engaged in journalism, if you want to call it that has not been moored to facts. But this is the first time it's quite so directly endangered its very audience. And I thought that was actually quite telling and maybe might be effective in persuading them to change their ways.
But the Murdochs themselves are clearly hypocritical, because Rupert Murdoch's birthday was on March the 8th, and they cancelled the birthday party out here in Bel Air for him for the fear of the coronavirus. So amongst themselves, they're taking it seriously, but the propaganda they put out over the air is unbelievably irresponsible. So what explains that?
Well, I think, Fox News is basically a business investment for Murdoch, not necessarily his, ideological id expressing itself, although he's certainly a conservative. And, as long as Fox News has made money by appealing to this, demographic niche, I think, Murdoch's been happy to laugh all the way to the bank.
So the letter concludes, and let me quote it: "The basic purpose of news organizations is to discover and tell the truth. This is especially necessary and obvious amid a public health crisis. Television bears a particular responsibility because even more millions than usual look there for reliable information. In the name of both good journalism and public health, we call upon you to help protect the lives of all Americans, including your elderly viewers, by ensuring that the information you deliver is based on scientific facts." Now, this letter goes out at a time when more and more people are watching cable news, both Fox. Fox has always been the dominant cable news outlet, followed by CNN and then MSNBC. So the timing of this letter is very important. So what's your sense then of whether there will be any kind of corrective measure on the part of Fox? They tack exactly with Trump. In fact, I spoke the other day to the New York Times media correspondent Ben Smith, who'd been writing about the Murdochs, and he made the case almost that Fox News is actually run by Donald Trump himself, because all of their top stars, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and Sean Hannity, have direct communications with the president. He's more or less the program director at Fox News. Do you accept that idea?
Well, I absolutely accept the idea that there's a very fine distinction between the two, but as to who's leading and who's following. And I think sometimes Trump leads and the network follows, but I think sometimes it's the other way too. That that Trump gets an awful lot of his information from Fox News and often reacts to their programming with tweets and stuff that are pretty directly correlated. But it's all the more vital now on something like this. This is literally a matter of life and death, and it hasn't been quite so naked in those terms with the other kind of reporting that Fox has done over the years. But this is this could kill thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. This kind of false spreading of false information, scientific information, at a time like this.
And again, I'm speaking with Mark Feldstein, who's a professor and the chair of broadcast journalism at the University of Maryland. For over 2 decades, he's been an award-winning investigative correspondent for CNN, ABC, and NBC, and is a 2-time winner of the George Foster Peabody Award, and is the author of Poisoning the Press: Richard Nixon, Jack Anderson, and the Rise of Washington Scandal Culture, and he is among the 74 signatories of professors and journalists who have issued an open letter to Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch about Fox News' irresponsible coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, already there's evidence, not so much that people are dying because they're following the advice of Hannity and company, but according to recent polls, people who watch Fox News are much less likely than others to say they're worried about the coronavirus. A Pew Research poll finds 79% of Fox viewers surveyed believe the media has exaggerated the risks of the virus. 63% of Fox viewers say they believe the virus posed a minor threat. And just as recently as March the 22nd, Fox News host Steve Hilton was deploring the mainstream press's coverage of the pandemic, saying our ruling class and their TV mouthpieces are whipping up fear over this virus. Of course, that is the idea that Fox pushes this idea of this straw man, the liberal elite, in this case, the ruling class, is so preposterous. I mean, Trump is the president of the oligarchs, of the plutocrats. Look what he's doing now. No American politician has ever done this, let alone get away with it. He's actually calling Putin and Saudi Arabia's MBS to raise the price of oil, to mean that people pay more at the pump. No American politician in history has ever gone against the American consumer in that naked way. So Trump is in charge of this country. He's the president. How can these people on the far-right media bubble continue to pretend that somehow they and their audience are victims?
I don't know. That's certainly something they're always, complaining about, that minority groups have a sense of victimization, unfair sense, but they've kind of been quite good at championing that themselves. Getting back to the coronavirus reporting and the fact that Fox has been influential in affecting behavior and my attitudes. One of the more interesting studies that I read showed that actually one of the biggest predictors of not taking the coronavirus seriously, not taking this pandemic seriously, was partisanship, and often, usually, partisanship follows from religion or income or other things, but this is actually a case where sort of ideology is generating it, that we've become such a polarized society that, half of the country is willing to disbelieve even something as uncontested as the deadliness of an epidemic.
So what explains then how this division has metastasized? It's certainly a lot of media scholars like yourself have traced it back to getting rid of the fairness doctrine, and it looks as though right-wing media activists were ready right out of the gate, and that has, since Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine, we've seen how quickly Rush Limbaugh and others emerged. Cable news, of course, wouldn't be subject to the FCC in that sense, but what explains this, why this juggernaut has grown so powerful over the decades? Is it because, as Murdoch argues, that the people in the base, the people in the Fox News bubble and in the right-wing echo chamber, they weren't served by the mainstream media up until then? So is that the explanation, that somehow there's just a group of people in this country who've always believed in all of this right-wing nonsense, and they were just waiting for a voice to speak to them?
Well, that's a great question. I think, no, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think, mainstream media can be faulted for its arrogance and its elitism, and I think that turned off a lot of middle America, and that Fox News, by sort of symbolically playing to some of their concerns, like Trump, without really addressing the substance of them, was able to sort of turn their heads and move them to the right. in ways that were inimical to their own, to their own, to their own lives. It's a little bit of a novel thought to think that Rupert Murdoch would listen to a bunch of journalism professors, were not exactly his constituency, certainly not the Fox News constituency. Although I will say this, I have actually testified in Fox's behalf in some First Amendment cases where they were trying to get Fox reporters to divulge their sources, because regardless of where you are on the ideological spectrum, the First Amendment applies to all. And Rupert Murdoch did get rid of Glenn Beck when the crazy was getting sort of too great for him to be able to stomach anymore. And at some level, this to be in such denial about such a terrible, such a scientifically uncontested fact when the stakes are so high, risks alienating viewers, and particularly because it's the elderly viewers that disproportionately watch Fox. This is in some senses really hitting close to home hit close to home for Fox in terms of their viewership if they become so utterly undermined. And we've started to see Fox, like Trump, starting to take it more seriously in the last week or two. And even within Fox, it's easy to think of it as a monolith, but it isn't completely. And in fact, Tucker Carlson, much as I disagree with him politically on most things, was kind of early at Fox in taking this more seriously. And eventually, some of the network was coming along, and Trump, Carlson actually lobbied Trump on this. So, to the extent that there's starting to be a change by both Fox and Trump, it may be, in fact, in part because of